Well, we have done the state of goaltending and the state of defense. Now it's time to look at the forward core and see what the state of that is. As the Carolina Hurricanes go into a huge offseason with $28.4 million in cap and a lot of ways to make this roster even better, especially with the forwards.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. Got a fun Friday show to wrap up the week as we get to look at the forwards and see what the state of that is for the Carolina Hurricanes. Are we going to see a mix of internal and external additions to the roster this year? And if the Hurricanes do go external, which I definitely think they will, who could be available in free agency? But before we start all that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, state of the Carolina Hurricanes, we all know where they're at right now, and the fact that they currently have 12 forwards signed to the forward core if they go with the particular roster that is set per Puckpedia with Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, Seth Jarvis, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Taylor Hall, the Jordans in Martinook and Stahl, William Carrier, Jackson Blake, Logan Stankoven, Mark Jankowski, and they've even added Bradley Nadeau. That's the currently signed 12 forwards on this team right now, which take up $44.263 million of the cap, which would be 46.3%. Now, could that be the 12? Obviously not. The Hurricanes are definitely going to make some moves. Do I see Bradley Nadeau making the current roster? I don't really think so. I think they might give him another year in Chicago because he's only 20 years old. Why rush him up there, especially when you already have Logan Stankoven, who's 22, Jackson Blake, who's 21. As of currently right now, Jesperi Kotkaniemi at 24, Seth Jarvis at 23, and Andrei Svechnikov at 25. As of right now, it's Jordan Stahl at 36, Martinook at 32, Taylor Hall at 33. Those are your older guys on the forward core, with Carrier being 30, Jankowski also being 30, and Sebastian Aho at 27. So if the Hurricanes don't add anyone to the forward core and they just stay pat, it's an okay forward core, definitely a lot of younger guys, but I just don't see the Hurricanes running it back. And obviously there's no reason why to run back most of this core, and all you're adding is Bradley Nadeau, because if you look at this roster, the guys that you're kind of taking off it right now is Jack Roslovic, Eric Robinson, and then Tyson Jost. And Tyson Jost was mainly just an extra from the AHL. So really, you're losing Roslovic and Robinson from the starting core, and really you're adding is Bradley Nadeau. That's kind of about it, and that's still with one of those guys being an extra in probably Roslovic more than anything else, like we saw this postseason. So it's just looking at the depth chart for the Hurricanes, especially for the forward core. There's a couple spots open. Definitely in the top six. You're looking at possibly maybe 2C, because you definitely need an addition there, because honestly, since Vincent Trocheck, the Hurricanes haven't really had a legitimate 2C option. And honestly, you also need to go get yourself a top scoring, or at least a top end, top six winger. Could be the left side, could be the right side, whichever. But you're going to have to add to the top six, and it's either with the center and or a winger. And I think it should definitely be both. So as much as I like Bradley Nadeau and I love his shot, I think you give him another year in Chicago. Let him just keep developing. Because like I said, he's only 20. Why rush this kid already when you already have a bunch of guys who are 21, 22, 23, 24? There's really no reason to rush these guys. You can go get a winger that's in their upper 20s for a few years and go from there, because there's other parts of this forward core contracts coming off the books. I mean, Jackson Blake is in his last year of his ELC, so with Logan Stankoven. Obviously, the Hurricanes and Stankoven want to get that contract extension done. Mark Jankowski's going into the last year of his deal. After that, you got one more year each of Martinuk and Stahl, so who knows where you're looking at with those two guys after 26, 27, but you have Carrier locked up until the end of the 29-30 season, so 5 more years there. You got Andrei Svechnikov to the end of 28-29. Then you got Taylor Hall for the next 3 seasons because he just signed a contract extension. Jesperi Kotkaniemi's at the end of 29-30, so he's got 5 years left. And Sebastian Aho is at the end of the 31-32 season. The same thing with Seth Jarvis. So you do have at least, for the most part, going at least 28-29. You got about 5 forwards locked up. And that's KK, Jarvis, Svech, Aho, and Carrier. Of course, anything could change by that time, but that's what you're looking at. But obviously, you know that they're probably going to be an extension on Stankoven. You know, Bradley Nadeau is going to come up. He's going to run out of his ELC at some point because that ends at the end of the 28-29 season. So you know there's going to be a Bradley Nadeau extension at some point whenever he does come up. So looking at the current state, you do have a good young core of guys, and even then, you got some guys who are on at the tail end of their ELCs, and guys who haven't really even started their ELCs yet, aka Nadeau, Felix Engelstrom, stuff like those guys like that. So you're kind of figuring out where to go from there. So as of now, the future looks bright, but I just, like I said, for me, I just don't see the Hurricanes going and throwing Nadeau in that fast when you could just give him some extra time to get ready. Because right now, even for their forward core in the system, you got Gleb Trexoff in through 26-27 where he's an RFA. Justin Robitaille's in the last year of his ELC. Felix Engelstrom is not an RFA until the end of the 27-28 season. And Josiah Slavin's in the last year of his deal, and he comes an unrestricted free agent next offseason. Then you got Skylar Brindamore, Ryan Suzuki, and Noel Gunler, all RFAs, but Brindamore and Suzuki are arbitration eligible, and then Juha Jaska is going to be a unrestricted free agent. So you only have really 4 forwards signed to your minor league team, 3 RFAs and an UFA. So, and with those guys, I can see the Hurricanes bring in all 4 of those guys back for next year to help with their core in Chicago. And then, of course, they can look at, Jaden Perron, possibly Alexander Rykov, Michael Emerson. There's a lot of guys down there even then that you can look at. And I know Justin Poirier, who is, they have to sign him by June 1st of 2026, but he is going to go to the University of Maine next year. So even then, in the system, you only have a few signings, and that's, like I said, that's not even including Bradley Nadeau, who Puckpedia has with the NHL club. So you add him there, you got 5, 6 guys that are signed in the system. So obviously you're going to have to get some moves there, just to fill out the AHL squad. So for the Hurricanes, yeah, you could have some internal additions if you really wanted to, but I just don't. Like I said, with $28.4 million in cap, I just don't see them sticking heavily on an internal moves and just bringing guys up. Like I said, give Nadeau another year in Chicago. He's only 20. Yeah, he popped up for 32 goals. That's great, but let's just give him more time. There's no reason to rush him because, like I said, you already have a young core with just Stankoven, Blake, Jarvis, and KK and all those guys. You can go out and get some external moves, and that's where I think the Hurricanes are going to be at. So that being said, are we going to see a mix of internal and external additions, or could this be one or the other? Stick around, and we'll talk about that here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. There's nothing like playoff hockey. The energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. Unfortunately, the Stanley Cup playoffs are officially done, and isn't really October yet because I need that hockey back. But there's never been a better time to see it live, especially when it comes up for the 25-26 season. Game Time makes getting in the building fast and affordable. Game Time gives you the last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to puck drop, so you can score big without overpaying. And the best way to do it, right now, Zone Deals are offering 10% off exclusive Zone Deals for FIFA Club World Cup matchups. And the best thing, too, is their seat view finder is absolutely perfect. So you know what you're looking at from your seat before you buy your tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, when it comes to the Carolina Hurricanes in their forward core, I've talked about this for the defense. I've talked this for goaltending. Goaltending, you're pretty much set. If you look towards the defense, you maybe add one or two guys here, maybe just mostly one out of anything else. But in terms of that, do we see the Hurricanes going more internal, or are we seeing them go with the more external type of moves? And I feel like with the team being where it's at with $28.4 million in cap, there's going to be some external moves. Could it be one player? Could it be two? Could it possibly be three? I think that's where it's probably going to be at, because as of right now, with the guys they have coming back, I just don't see where this is a stand pat year, which they shouldn't really do, because like I said, you got all this money, go use it. And Eric Tulsky said, they don't want to get reckless with it, and you don't have to get reckless with the money, because even then the cap goes up to $104 million or even more next offseason. And there's a lot more unrestricted free agents you can go in for next offseason. So if you really wanted to, you could make a couple moves, make them short term, and then go for the big guys next year if you feel like you can do kind of both, where you can go get players for this offseason, make a run at it, and then if you think like you can go get a lot more bigger, more high-end talent next offseason, you can do that too. You can make it work in that case. But I think you definitely need to go pretty much all in this offseason as well, because where are you going to get an opportunity to go get two or three guys with high-end money that you could slide to this lineup for a long time? And like I said, could you see some internal moves? I mean, like I said, as of right now, you're really adding Bradley Nadeau to the lineup. That's your only real addition to the forward core, because they have 12 guys all signed. That's including Nadeau, and that's not even if you do an extension with Robinson or Roslovic, which for me, I think the Hurricanes are probably going to do an extension on Robinson. They really liked him. I know Eric Robinson really liked Carolina, so if there is an internal addition coming back for a re-sign, I think Eric Robinson is probably the best case scenario. Could it be 2 or 3 years? Possibly. But what's that contract look like? Is it $2 or $3 million? Could it be 4? If they can bring it back for 2 years or even if it's 2 or 3 years at like $2.5 million per, I still think that's a pretty decent deal. You bring him back, you fit him in the lineup. Is he part of your 12, or is he a 13th forward and just be that extra guy you can bring in? Possibly. That wouldn't be a bad option if you bring back Eric Robinson more than anything else. And then there's your 12th guy if you really think about it, before you even bring in your externals. You send Bradley Nadeau down, give him another year in Chicago, but at least you have Eric Robinson lined up for a couple seasons at an AAV that works. And then if you go get some external players, then okay, then Robinson's your 13th forward, but at least you have a 13th forward that knows the system, had a career year last year, and you feel comfortable with him. coming in to maybe give a guy rest, or if someone gets injured or whatever the case may be. I think Robinson would probably be the lone re-signing, at least on the NHL roster. I mean, they could bring back Suzuki and all those other Skylar Brindamore, all those other guys that are currently RFA slash or even Juha Jaska as a UFA. I think they do probably got a lot to do of the minor league re-signings more than anything else. But if you're talking straight up NHL roster, I think Robinson's probably going to be your best bet and probably the only guy that's going to come back on the current roster from this previous season going into 25-26. That's probably going to be your only internal move. And like I said, that's also sending Bradley Nadeau back down to Chicago. And I think this is going to be more of an external offseason where you're looking at getting 2, possibly 3 guys. I know everyone listened to the Thursday show. I had Tim Donnelly from 99 The Fan on, and we talked about possibly, could Matt Duchene be one of those guys? Unfortunately, he did get extended by the Dallas Stars for another 4 years at over $4 million. So he's technically out. Granlund's still available. John Tavares, if they really don't want to go there. The UFA market for centers is really it's a lot of older guys. They could look at Ryan Donato. Donato just signed a 4-year contract extension with Chicago, so that's another guy off the board. Like I said, going younger or having younger centers is just tough that are UFAs. A lot of them are RFA guys more than anything else. And right now, the Hurricanes' best offer sheet possibility is a second, and that's within the $4.6 million range. I see a lot of teams matching that, especially with the cap going up across the league to 95.5. I think any offer sheet that the Hurricanes give for just their second rounder is going to get matched for any of the young centers that are even available. So, and then the next one after that is 11.7, and that's 4 first rounders. And I'm sorry, there's no RFA center that's worth 4 first rounders at 11.7. So, most likely, if you want to go center for your external option at 2C, it's going to be unrestricted wise. It's going to be a veteran. It's going to be a guy in his, early to mid 30s. How much money do you give him? How long is the term? Is it 2 years? Is it 3? Do you want to give him that $4, $5, $6 million? I know John Tavares is available, but he's talking $7, $8 million. He's at 34. Do you give John Tavares, $7 million for 2 seasons, maybe 3? I doubt that. It's a good short-term option, but not one. Like, do you really want to go and give up that type of money? That's the thing. So at that point, it's okay. What RFAs are available that you can go grab? That's kind of the big thing too. Is going to say in terms of what you're looking at internally, internal moves aren't really there if you're the Carolina Hurricanes in terms of centers. It is a very limited center core just for the Canes alone in terms of that aspect. So even if then, I know some people are looking at, do the Hurricanes go get Sam Bennett? Florida's looking at him. Jamie Benn, maybe, but his contract's pretty high. I just don't really see them going in that direction either. So UFAs are going to be pretty tough. Could you go RFA? Possibly, but who's really going to be available that you can go say, oh yeah, we want that guy? That's the tough part you're in right now if you're the Carolina Hurricanes. So if you go external, who's kind of available in free agency? Is it UFA way? Is it an RFA? Who really knows? And if you're even looking for wingers, what's that look like? So stick around and we'll talk about what possible forwards the Hurricanes could look at this offseason here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, like I said, in terms of the Carolina Hurricanes, there's a lot of question marks of like what direction you go in if you're this team? Do you go the UFA route with going for some wingers and centers? Do you go for a trade? How does all that work out? And I think with the where the Hurricanes are at, like I said, they had $28.4 million. There is some guys that we've heard me talk about for the last couple of weeks. Are a lot of players that I think that they could potentially look at in terms of at least UFA status that could work. Is just how much money are they willing to go spend, and are they able to get these guys? And one name I've talked about a lot, I know he's got a very mixed bag of reaction on him, is Mitch Marner. He's going to be 20 years old, a right shot, right winger. In terms of AFP analytics, he's looking at a contract of 7 times 12.952, which would be 13.56%. But there have been reports that even the Hurricanes, the Ducks, Vegas, there's a bunch of teams that are, very interested in him. But I know they're saying the Ducks and the Hurricanes are looking at possibly $14 million. Do you give Mitch 14? I would love to get Mitch Marner because I think he'd be a great fit for the Hurricanes. But like I said, there's a lot of mixed reactions on him because people want to talk about his playoff performance. But 63 points in 70 games, you can't really overlook that. Plus, he had 13 points in 13 games this past offseason. If you look at his numbers and you don't have a Maple Leaf logo next to his name, I think you look at him completely different because of what he can do. It's just because of it's the Maple Leafs. People think that he just vanishes, and somehow he's a glorified player of what we already have. I'm sorry, but if you look at a guy who's putting up over 90 points, 3 of the last 4 seasons, who just hit 100 points, I think that's really good. Plus, a change of scenery could look completely different if you're Mitch Marner. But that's one possible guy. Another guy that I've talked about that I think would be really great on this team is Nikolai Ehlers. And there's been reports that he might be interested in coming to Carolina, but also the Jets might want to keep him as well. AFP says 6 years, $8.106 million, but that could go up to 8.5. Do you give Ehlers that 6 by 8.1 or 8.5? Yeah, I'd give it to Ehlers. I think he's really good. I think he can fit into this team, especially on that second line. I think that's another great addition to, if you look at it that way. Other possible guys that you can potentially look at if you're some RFAs. I mean, do you look at Mikael Granlund as a center? I know the Stars just traded Mason Marchment, but do you look at Granlund as a possible option? I mean, he just made $5 million this past year. Is that someone that the Hurricanes potentially look at? Because as of right now, for Granlund, from AFP, they're saying he's looking at a 2-year by $5 million because he's 33, but he's a left shot center. I could see where he might get a contract that might be 3 years at like $5.5 or even $6 million. That's a possibility. Who really knows? And I know the Stars probably want to keep him. Like I said, and then if you look at other free agents, I know a lot of people are looking at Sam Bennett. Bennett is probably going to be the Panthers' first option. They might look at him. And then I've heard some rumbling. I've seen some people say, well, what about Brad Marchand? I'm sorry, if people are going to be negative about Marco Rossi's size, hate to break it to you, Brad Marchand is still around that same size. And I know that he's a pest, he's a rat, he gets under people's skins. I understand that. But you can't complain about Marco Rossi's size and then say, oh, let's go get Brad Marchand. Yes, I know their games are way completely different, especially with what Brad Marchand played in the Stanley Cup final, but you can't say one's size is not good enough, but if you look at another guy, oh, it's fine. It's got to be one or the other. And I think, yeah, would Brad Marchand be a good option? Yeah, I think so. But does Brad Marchand want to come to Carolina, and does Carolina want to get Brad Marchand? Because as of right now, AFP is saying 2 years at $5.1 million for Brad Marchand. He's a left shot, left winger who's going to be 37. Do you give a guy who's 37 over $5 million for the next 2 years? Because that takes him to 39. Maybe, but I don't really know if that's the avenue that Carolina Hurricanes want to go down with. And there's talks of Claude Giroux probably going back to Ottawa. I've talked about Brock Besser. I would love to get him here. It's just he's a right shot right winger, but he doesn't really have a two-way game. He's definitely more of a shooting first type of guy, but I think he'd be a good addition to the Hurricanes, so that's a possibility. Pius Suter, 29-year-old left shot center. I would definitely love to get Pius Suter in Carolina because I think he'd fit the system and be good as a 2C to Sebastian Aho. And even then, looking at his contract, Pius Suter is 4 years at $4.983 million. If you give him a 4 by 5.1 or 5.5, I still think it's another good deal for Pius Suter as well. So that's another great option. There's your 2C. He had a great year under Rick Tocchet. You put him with Carolina and Rod Brind'Amour, I think Suter will be a good 2C behind Aho. Then after that, you're looking at, your Riley Smiths. Do you look at Jonathan Drouin? Do you look at Andrei Kuzmenko? Which Andrei Kuzmenko wouldn't be a bad option as well, but he did have 37 points in 66 games, but he had 11 goals. What does that look like for a right shot left winger who's 29 years old and Kuzmenko? Is that someone who could fit the Hurricane system as well? And going by what AFP is saying, he could play left wing and right wing as a right shot, 29 years old, and his projected contract, 3 years at $4.5 million. Could it go to 4.5? Could it go to 5? Possibly. But do you give up that type of money to a guy who only played 66 games and only had 37 points? That's the big question in terms of the forwards. Now, let's say the Hurricanes go RFA. What does that look like? Well, as I stated before, the Hurricanes are only able to use their second-round pick, or they got to give up 4 firsts. And I'm sorry, there's no one, as of right now, that fits a bill of 4 first-rounders. So guys that are available, JJ Peterka out of Buffalo. Yeah, you're going to have to get his rights, but Buffalo has taken some calls about him. What type of deal does that look like? Are you just going straight futures? Are you adding a Felix Unger-Sorm, or are you adding a type of forward and draft picks for JJ Peterka, who's a left shot center, but another guy who's 5'10"? Does that work out in that case? Gabe Velarde is available. He's a right shot center who's 25 by the Jets. But apparently the Jets really like this guy, and he really loves Winnipeg, so I doubt he's going. Minnesota Wild's looking at possibly trading Marco Rossi, and you guys heard me talk about him. I think it'd be a great fit. Could it be 2 years at 4.5, or could it be 7 by 7.3, or if they get his rights, is an 8 by 8 possible? I would love to get Marco Rossi, but apparently size is his negative. Okay, then what about Brad Marchand's size? What about JJ Peterka? What about all these other guys? Yeah, I think size does matter, but if you're getting some talent out of it too, you're going to have to do something to get guys like that. And I think, Marco Rossi could be a potential option because does he get that type of money? Do the Hurricanes look at Matthew Knies out of Toronto? He's another possibility, but Toronto probably wants to keep him. I think he probably wants to stay in Toronto as well. But, AFP, long-term for Matthew Knies, 7 years, 7.2, or it's 2 years at 4.1. Yeah, the Hurricanes would love to get this kid at 22, but it's not going to be an RFA. And I'm sorry, he's not 11-7 for 4 first rounders. And even then, does Toronto trade him? I very much doubt that that's the case. They're going to go and trade for Matthew Knies, and Toronto's going to give him up, especially when you look at a year where he had 58 points in 78 games. Morgan Geekie, a right shot center. I would love to get Morgan Geekie from Boston, but Boston is saying they really want to keep him. So that's an unfortunate thing where you're looking at a guy who could play all 3 forward slots, 26. He's a right shot, but 4 years at 6.5. I would love to get him, but I don't think Boston's going to give him up. Then, after that, who else is available? Maybe Mason McTavish, but the Ducks are probably going to keep him. Dmitry Voronkov, Columbus is probably going to keep him. And it just goes on and on and on and on of just guys you would love to go get, but what do possible trades look like? And that's the thing is yeah, you have all this money, but you're probably looking more like adding Ehlers, a Marner, a Besser, all those type of guys. Could all of them be possible fits? Yes, I think they really can, because you're getting some talent out of those guys who've all played top 6 minutes, who have produced in the playoffs. And I know it's with Marner and the Maple Leafs, they do crash out a lot, but you can't say no to 63 points in 70 games and 13 in the last playoff run, 13 points in 13 games, or what Nikolai Ehlers did for the Jets. You also look at Brock Besser. He's only made the playoffs twice with Vancouver, but yeah, does he play two-way? Not really, but you still get a guy who scores goals that can really help out the top six and the power play. Restricted free agents. Offer sheets are going to be tough. I expect offer sheets in 2020, in next offseason, what your picks would be in 2027. I think the Hurricanes could go in the RFA way next offseason more than anything else. But if they want a restricted free agent, it's going to be a trade. But who's willing to give up their guys? There's like two guys who are RFAs that could be potential pickups: JJ Peterka and Marco Rossi. Other than that, I don't think Boston's not going to give rid of Geeky. I don't think Toronto's going to give up Nyes. I don't think the Jets are going to give up Velarde. So if you're going RFA status, you have two teams that are selling their RFAs. And that's really about it. And who are you willing to give up? So it's going to be UFAs more than anything else. It's just, if you want to get good, you got to pay the guys to come here. And that's going to be the interesting part of the offseason for the Hurricanes. But that's where we kind of stand at right now in terms of the state of the forwards. You've got 12 guys signed currently. That's including Brian Nadeau and Jesperi Kotkaniemi and all those guys still being on the roster. You might have one internal move with Robinson possibly coming back, but it's going to be a lot of external additions. And in talking about external additions, Marner, Ehlers, Besser, all those guys are possibilities. Couple RFAs, maybe. It all just depends. And Eric Tulsky and his guys, they're going to do their job. The pro scouts are going to do their job. They're going to figure out what the best deal is to potentially bring guys in if it is a trade, or they're just going to figure out, hey, this guy, we can look at him. Let's give him this money and see if it works out. So it'll be a very, very interesting for the Carolina Hurricanes with 21 draft picks available if they want to do some trades, and they have $28.4 million in cap. Should be very interesting to see how they use that money. But guys, this will be a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen. Your second listen, why don't you go check out Locked on AHL podcast? There is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On AHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you want to keep up with me and my one true Zach on X, the podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at DZachary_Martin, where you can check out my link tree in my bust, where you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcast, well, it's the Surgecast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For this show, it's Locked on Hurricanes on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, well, it's Locked on Hurricanes. Subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to make sure you get notifications for when the new show drops. Hit the thumbs up button to let me know if you like the show as well. Share it with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Enjoy your Friday and enjoy your weekend. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.